Thank you, Puget Sound chapter, for bringing this great series on beginning writing and editing. My name is Sherry Harbaugh. I think I know a lot of you that are on the webinar today. For those of you who don't, I've been an independent specifier for nearly 30 years of my architectural career. Over the last couple of years, I've been shifting my consulting toward teaching, encouraging companies and individuals how to read, write, research products, and just in general, interpreting specifications. So I want to start out, first our learning unit, sorry. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about drawings and what goes on the drawings, what goes in the specification. We're going to cover the 4 C's of communicating in specifications and kind of how does that work, and how does that reflect into our specifications. We're going to talk about reference standards, terminology, and we'll talk about incorporating schedules into the specs. But before we dive into that, I want to talk about who are we? I mean, so many times in our social settings, we meet people who are not in construction. And they say, so what do you do? And we say, I'm a specification consultant, or I write architectural specifications. And they're like, so what do you do? It's really hard to explain to people not in the construction industry what you do as a specifier. So I want you to put in the chat some ideas of how you introduce yourself. How do you introduce what you do as a specifier? And the reason I want you to do this is I want the young specifiers to kind of get an idea of how they can introduce themselves and how they understand that they are a part of a successful project. Some ideas would be helping designers get specific on their vision. I like to use bridging the documents to construction, helping define results. Another one I like is connecting ideas with products. So put some of these in the chat so that the young specifiers can start to get an idea, what are their opportunities as a specifier and how can they start introducing themselves as a specifier. So I think the big thing is I like the bridging the gap, and we're responsible for bridging gaps between the drawings and the specs and what's going to get built. So we're really doing the nitty-gritty work. And so when we start talking about what goes on the drawings and what goes on the specs, we really need to keep looking at specifications as being complementary. They're like a puzzle. They have to fit together without overlapping. So when you're looking at the information that you're going to include, we want to say it once. The drawings identify your materials in generic terms, and then the specifications will take over to describe the materials in more detail. So after you do the research on the product, the specification is where it's going to tell the contractor what product was used to design the project, the quality of the product, performance characteristics, how we expect the product to perform, installation options. That's another good one. It might show it on the drawings, but we want to try to define that in the specification based on the product research that we've done. So let's look at the 4 C's for communicating effectively in specifications. We know these from studying from the CDT. We know the 4 C's of communication. Be clear, correct, complete, and concise. So let's dive in a little bit more deeply. Being clear. Specifications are legal documents. We hear this all the time, and then someone asked me, oh, so are they really legal documents? Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I do know that anytime there's a problem, whether it's an RFI or whatever, it always says, well, what does the spec say? So we do need to keep in mind that people are looking at these. They may not be looking at them when you want them to look at them, like at 50% construction documents when you want to review, but they are looking at them when you get to the field. So we want to observe the rules of punctuation. We don't want to change the meaning of the intent by putting a comma in the wrong spot. We use a comma after each item in a series. That's called the Oxford comma. And capitalizing parties to the contract. Okay, this is something that I see misused quite often. I think you'd be surprised if you look at the contract or, the general conditions of the contract or the agreement, you might be surprised at how many words actually should be capitalized when you're communicating about a project and when you're putting it in the specification. For example, project manual, that should be capitalized. Work, when you're talking about the work, the scope of work, that should be capitalized. When you're just using these words generally, no, you don't have to capitalize them, such as, do you know the architect that designed the building? Okay, so that's just a general conversation. But when you're talking about the architect of a record, that A in architect needs to be capitalized. Being correct, presenting information accurately and precisely. Select your appropriate reference options. This one shows, type 1, 2, or 3 cement. If you're going to list all 3 of them, you're giving the contractor options to use 1, 2, or 3. So be very clear which type is required. Select products that meet the performance criteria. Check your manufacturers. Are your manufacturers current? I bet 90% of the manufacturers that I talk to, their biggest gripe about specifications is out-of-date manufacturers. So just take some extra time, make sure that they're current. There's a lot of buyouts and it's hard to keep track of them, but it's important and they respect it too. They recognize it when you put out the extra effort to clean out the old manufacturers. And name the part of the specification. We know this. 1.1 is called an article. The capital A is a paragraph. When you're writing instructions in an addendum or an RFI response, let's be clear and correct. Don't say delete section 2.7. We know what those names are. Be correct in naming the parts of the specification. Delete article 2.7. It's not that hard. We know how to do it, and we need to be consistent with that. And we need to teach the rest of the team how to name the parts of the specification too. Being complete. Being complete, incorporating your cost impacts is probably the biggest one that I hear. Submittals impact your costs. If we're asking for submittals that are out of the realm of a normal manufacturer submittal, is going to increase their costs. Mock-ups, is it going to be in place? Is it going to be off-site? Are we going to do field testing? Are we going to do testing on it? Incorporate your fire ratings. Make sure we're identifying if the color is standard or custom. If we don't know what the color is going to be, oftentimes we'll say as selected by architect from manufacturer's standard colors, or it'll say custom colors, so that when we're looking at pricing, at least we have an idea, custom or standard. Installation methods, make sure that the installation method is called out correctly. Coordinate that with the drawings. If it's not on the drawings, make sure it's correct in the specification. Avoid using by others. If it's by someone else, tell us who it is. Is it by structural, or is it by the civil consultant? And when we say see drawings in the specifications, let's tell them where to go. See drawing sheet A 7.11. I've seen drawing sets that are hundreds of pages. When you just say see drawings, that doesn't narrow it down much at all. And it usually results in an RFI because they want to know where. And so you say, well, you didn't look at the drawings. Well, we had 100+ sheets of drawings to look through to see where see drawings was supposed to be sending them. Being concise. Being concise is using the correct meaning of the word, eliminating unnecessary words. know your definitions, amount versus quantity, either versus both. Either is going to give the contractor an option. Both says to use both. Don't expect something to be installed if you ask for it to be furnished. Provide means furnish and install. If you want them to furnish and install, use the appropriate language. Ask them to provide. Specs are written to the contractor. So you don't need to say contractor shall at the beginning of each sentence. Streamline your sentences. Start the sentence with an action word. Use this example: apply, store millwork, under shelter. There's the unnecessary word all. Store all millwork under shelter. Do you really need to say all? Just saying store millwork under shelter is giving the same or better, correct, as it says, description of what the intent is, what you want done. Reference standards. Let's talk about these. Reference standards are commonly found in the specs to define performance characteristics. I don't know of any specifier that has the entire collection of ASTM standards. It's very voluminous, and I know they're electronic now. You can probably purchase all of them. You can also purchase them one at a time, but there's also AMA standards that are available. There's ACI, Steel Institute has standards. So there's a lot of different standards out there. I found that, and I don't own them either. I found that reading the summary, if you do an internet search and you read the summary, that's usually enough information for me to get me on my way to make some decisions. Research online, manufacturers go into more in depth, or they'll publish a white paper on the product that might describe the standard that applies to their material in more detail if you need it. Either way, it's good to know what you're looking for if you need it. And I have some examples here. Reference options for ASTM E1264. I'm using this as an example. It's a classic ceiling tiles. This is a great example of how the ASTM defines the material. So if you see, you probably can't read it in the small screen, but the ASTM E1264, the classification type 3, form 2, pattern CEK, that indicates a different texture and, well, it's painted mineral fiber, I put it right there, versus your other one, you've got your type 12 form 2 pattern each. So we've got two different types of ceiling tiles that are identified within the ASTM. So it's important you can't just say ASTM E1264. You need to go into a little more detail if you're doing a performance specification for the ceiling tiles, even though you want them to meet the performance criteria there. I have another sample here for spray applied fireproofing. You'll notice that the two different ones that I have picked out here, the density for the one in the yellow highlight is calling for 15 pounds per cubic foot as an industry standard, which is the same as the green highlighted one under recommended specification. But you'll notice the difference is the tested value. So the yellow highlighted one says it's greater than 18 pounds per cubic foot, whereas the green is 15, which is the recommended or industry standard performance. So my point is that if you are going to specify around a basis of design and you want that particular product, in this case, the 18 pound per cubic foot, if you specify that as your basis of your design and you get a substitution from the material in green, it's not going to meet your specification. So it's a decision if you want to specify your industry standard or if you want to specify specifically around the product. So how do you know if you have options? Oftentimes you don't even know you have the options, especially when you're beginning, you're just like, okay, there's no options, we're good to go. You will see the options. You're going to see them in your editor notes, in your guide spec, even your manufacturer's guide specs are going to alert you when there's options to be considered. The other way, you're going to see brackets, and you'll see another comment that I'll get from manufacturers is, eliminate all the brackets. I don't want to see all those options in there. It's like, okay, I get it. Yeah, get rid of the brackets. Bracket searches are distracting. They're distracting for the owner, but you know, sometimes I'll leave them in at 50% to alert the architect that a decision needs to be made. Let's talk about terminology. I love terminology. I love it because it gets my head back in the game. For example, as an independent specifier, I might work on a project and then it might go in for permit, and I won't hear anything about the project for a couple months, maybe a year. And so then when it starts back up again, it's like, oh, it's like I'm starting all over again. But by then we've got the table of contents, we've got a better set of drawings, maybe we've got the permit set of drawings. So then I can start comparing terminology, go through the table of contents, or start with your floor plan and look for things. It's like, oh, well, it says toilet partition here and the spec says toilet compartment. Okay, so we've got conflicting information. So that really starts to get my head rolling around like you said, getting my head back in the game on terminology and figuring out what the project's all about. But why else is it important? Inconsistent terminology creates confusion when you're preparing the documents. The toilet partition and compartment, we can figure that out. But when we're talking about weather barriers, and it's an air barrier or a WRB somewhere else, that's just going to cause confusion. Sectional doors are not coiling doors. The other one I see is curtain wall and storefront. There's a significant cost difference between the price of curtain wall and storefront. So when you're detailing it, but when you're writing the specification on it, if you see both, you might think, oh, we need both specifications. You need one for curtain wall and one for storefront. These are conversations that we need to have with the architect, with the design team. It wastes time for us because we're writing 2 specs instead of 1, maybe, potentially. And it also, once those get out to the field for pricing or under construction, all of a sudden we're getting R5s or claims, and it can raise construction costs because they might find, oh, we needed curtain wall, not storefront. You know, then all of a sudden our costs are going up, and it can cause delays. So getting that terminology, I see it as part of my job. Get the terminology straight, help the architect figure it out. Maybe they don't know either. It's a great learning tool. Schedules. So I like them. I like schedules. I use them, but I try not to overuse them. I've seen waterproofing types scheduled in the spec and then referred back to each related section. I think that might be a little overkill, especially if you have a lot of waterproofing schedules or a lot of waterproofing assemblies. But I think the reason that can cause conflict is just conflicting information, because if it changes in one place, even within your spec, so it's hard enough to keep it straight between the drawings and the specs. But then when you're interspec and you're trying to coordinate too much information within the spec, it's conflicting within yourself. But I do like schedules. I like how they can organize your information, especially like finish schedules. Oftentimes you'll see the interior design team will have a schedule that has your manufacturer, you know, the color, the installation, you know, and it really helps streamline our specification too by being able to refer to that schedule. I also use them for tiling, for example, so we can organize how the tiling installation methods. I put them all at the end. I usually put them at the end of part 3. Schedule is usually the last article heading, and then I'll include them there. The thing to be aware of is don't put them in both the drawings and the specs, because then you're setting yourself up again. If you change it in the drawings, it needs to be changed in the specs, and that's a communication thing. Not that you can't communicate, but it's a sticking point for conflict, RFIs, and contradictions, and we need to be complementary. So back to the say it once, say it in the most logical place. So we're already at the end of our learning units, but I want to do a summary here on what your specifications should do. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that you can put in the chat too. Specifications should designate the product in the proper place. I didn't cover master format and section format because I guess I'm under the assumption that at this point we know master format and we know 3-part section format, but if you don't, we need to learn that with your specifications. We want to make sure that people that are working with your specifications, reading them, that they can go to the industry standard location to find the product that they're looking for. Your specifications should be properly edited to reflect the project. Oftentimes we find information that we don't know if we need it or not. So I'm just going to leave it in. Don't leave it in just in case. It can just cause confusion down the road. Coordinate with consultants. That means a lot of contradictory information. I'm working on a project now where the landscape architect has written a cast in place concrete spec, which is, of course, the structural has done the same. They wrote a decorative metal handrails section, which overlaps my decorative metal handrails. They even wrote a high performance coating spec, which overlapped my high performance coating. So make sure that we're all coordinated so that when we go out, we don't have 2 sections that with the same title and number. At least catch that in advance and make sure that we've offset them by a couple numbers at least. Remember that the specifications address the contractor. We're not addressing the subcontractors or the trades or the suppliers. The specification should be coordinated with the drawings, like we've talked about. Say it once in either the drawings or the specs. Sometimes we're not going to have control over what the drawings say, and we might change our spec to refer to the drawings for something. Sometimes it might make sense to put it in 2 places. That's a conversation you'll have to have with the design team. Our specification should provide detailed information and use consistent terminology, like we talked about, that terminology thing, your vapor barriers, your aluminum composite metal panels, etc. Our specification should be coordinated with Division 1 requirements. And some of these topics I realize are much deeper than a quick summary overview, but Division 1 is a big deal. Division 1 are your administrative and procedural requirements for the entire project. So when we're asking for samples in each individual section or attic stock, that's going to tie back to your Division 1 requirements. What does Division 1 say? Those need to be coordinated. Sometimes the owner will have attic stock requirements or not want any attic stock. So both of those, the Division 1 and your individual sections, need to be modified to remove attic stock. And we need to include the correct use of words and grammar, as we discussed. Thank you for your attention. I haven't looked at the chat because I've been on a different screen, but I know that what we talked about here is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what specifiers need to know. But I hope this has given you a taste of the importance of specifications, and your role in a successful construction project as a specifier. And I wanted to say we don't operate in a vacuum. Specifications don't happen on their own. They take input from a lot of parties, manufacturers and other specifiers. I'm sure there's many on this call. We love to share our knowledge. Whenever you run into a spec issue, know that you are an email away from getting help. I have a rule of thumb of 20 minutes. If you can't figure it out in 20 minutes, it's time to call for help. And there's plenty of people out there waiting to help you. So please don't hesitate, reach out with me, or like I said, any of the other senior specifiers on this call, if you need something in the future. Before I close, I do want to invite you to join me January 30th at noon. I'm doing a live webinar on specification editing strategies for beginner specifiers. And I will be sharing some practical editing tips that I've used over the years as I've been editing specifications. I think they're going to include the link in the chat, but if you misplace it, just drop me a note and I can send you another link. So that wraps it up for me. Thank you. And do you want to look at were there questions in the chat?
Thank you so much, Sherry. There currently aren't any questions in the chat, so if people want to start doing that, and I will start us off with one. Just because I know that there are some people in the chat who are still relatively new to specifications. I think you'll be talking about this a little bit in your future presentation, but can you talk a little bit about your process when you start a project? Where do you start, or what do you look at first?
I typically look at the floor plans. That is going to start giving me a realm of what the materials are. I look at the floor plan so I can do a material takeoff. And that material takeoff is going to give me a table of contents. So I usually am starting with an entire table of contents, like from my master table of contents. And then I'll make notes about what it is. Like if I saw, I don't know, ceiling hung toilet partitions. So I'll, put that note next to that. If I see metal stairs or wood stairs, and then I'll make a note against that. So that helps me generate my table of contents. So that's my true starting point, is looking at the drawings. And I always ask, it's funny that there are architects out there that don't seem to think you need drawings to write a specification. I'll be like, well, what does the building look like? What do the drawings show? So that you can start generating that table of contents, because that's your basis. So that's my starting point.
Great. So from Rhiannon, we have, what is the best spot to find standard spec sections to download and format?
That's a good question. That's part of the research. There's a couple really great websites out there. If you go to, let's start with ARCAT. ARCAT has downloadable specifications. If you've picked a product, if you're looking at a specific product, I would start with that manufacturer's product, a spec. I'm not going to say all, but I'm going to say there's a lot of manufacturers that have their specifications online that you can download without having to register. I think that's hopefully is a thing of the past. But yeah, you can usually get, so let's go ARCAT. The other one is forspecs.com. They have specifications there. They'll link you to the website, and then you can look at their website to see if there's that particular manufacturer product has a spec to download.
Great. So the next one is from Jeff from Guardian Glass. It says, first, thanks, Sherry. Are specifiers required to include allowable alternates to the basis and design of a product to allow for competition in products, pricing, quality, etc.?
Not required. It just depends on the owner, like if it's a public bid project, usually they are. And if it's not public bid, like if it's private funded, you may not have to, but the owner may want to, just to see if they can get a better price on something.
Great. And from Catherine, we have, I had an engineer ask if we can start putting pictures of plumbing fixtures in the product section. What do you think about images and specs?
I've done it before. I had an owner ask me to do it and I did it. And I don't have an issue with it. I don't think there's any spec police. I don't know, some of the senior spec writers out there, do you want to chime in on that? You know, sometimes I feel like whatever it takes to convey the design intent is, you know, I don't like to, I don't want it to be a riddle. I don't want it to be a wild goose chase. I want to be able to be clear enough in the specification that we don't have to add in picture, but sometimes we may need to. We've done cut sheets. In fact, this morning, I submitted a project that had all the cut sheets in it. Was not for 100%. It was just DD. But yeah, a lot of times picture tells 1,000 words.
Yeah, and actually, just a quick note to that is Gloria Rasmussen down in California. She, for a while, was wanting to figure out how to animate specifications. It's really interesting
Oh,
stuff.
there you go.
Yeah. So Micah from Hatch was asking, anyone planning to recommend changes to the new edition of master format? Interested in what and why? I am planning to do so to expand sections in Division 34 transportation.
Planning to recommend changes. Well, when they did 2004, when they expanded it, there's a lot of empty divisions. So
Mhm.
there's definitely opportunity to
Mhm.
expand that.
Yeah. Do you know if there's a what the formal process for that is, or should he get
Um,
in touch with CSI?
yeah, CSI has a master format committee.
Okay, great.
Can I
So
can I chime in?
yeah, absolutely.
As far as the changes to master format, if you go to csiresources.com, just right on the front page, they are going through a review, so there should be a link to anybody to propose any sort of changes. We got a few I'm gonna submit, but
Oh, cool.
should be a link right there. So I guess they're
Great.
doing a new edition sometime later this year, next year or something.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, David.
And just a quick note, that's actually .org. Yeah, perfect. All right. So from Sophia, is there any spec writing software you like, SpecLink or Deltek, etc., or are you still using Word documents?
Is it okay if I'll tell everybody what I use. Most of the people know that what I use. I use Word documents and then I put them into Visi specs.
Okay. All right. I might follow up with you later because I have lots of busy spec questions
Okay.
that we can ask offline. All right. So from Cynthia, we have, hi, can you let me know the spelling of the spec websites? I believe one was RCAT, the other one, was for spec,
Oh, you just the number 4 specs.com.
SPECS.
Yeah.
And then Cynthia, you had RCAT spelled correctly. So that was great. Micah noted that page format has standards for how images and pictures can be inserted into the specs.
Oh,
The deadline for master format, it looks like, is April. From Charlie from Harper Wynn, it says, if the specification says no substitutions and it is a public project, how would you recommend a manufacturer to address the situation?
gosh, I think if it says, maybe David, you can chime in, or Melissa. I think if it's no substitutions, it's no substitutions, especially if it's an existing project and they're trying to match existing.
Mhm.
I keep thinking of particularly for King hardware, then there's no options. You're not going to get through. Or if they're for maintenance reasons.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times there's a reason for no substitution. Locks, they don't want to have 20 different locks from different manufacturers. If they've got a bunch of different buildings, they want to put the same roofing on each building. Or, I mean, it's a good question to ask to the owner, if they have any proprietary products that they want to use.
And for the public projects that I've been on, normally there has to be a specific process for doing a no substitutions. So it can't be a willy-nilly thing. They have to go through a process to get it approved to do so before it happens. But there's always mistakes made. So I don't think it would hurt to ask about it.
Yeah, that's what I would say too, is definitely worth the ask to find out why they're not allowing the substitution. And go from there.
Yeah. So I think we're out of questions, but I think one more kind of came up separately was when you're looking at specifications, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so when you're starting off, is there so let's say you have your list, you have your table of contents. Are there any specific sections that you think you should start with? And are there any sections that you would kind of wait on?
Yeah, this is exactly why I'm doing this session in 2 weeks, is because
Uh-huh.
it is overwhelming. Like, where do you start?
Yeah.
I'm type A. I start in 1 and I work my way right on through. So, I mean, that's the way I work.
See, I'm type B. Um, what I do is I usually start with structural if I'm writing the structural sections, because those won't change. And then, you know, the architectural and envelope, and if they've already made a decision, I will do that one. The last ones I do are finishes, because I have edited finishes the day we're sending the finished sections, the
Sure.
day that we're sending the bids out, you know, sections out for. So those are the last ones that I edit, or I will edit them, you know, leaving the product blank, figuring I'll get that information at the last minute. But you know, tile carpeting has been switched out for sheet carpeting, and resilient floor sheet has been switched out for it's usually a nightmare. So
Yeah.
I like to do, oh, go ahead.
and that's why more and more I'm doing the interior designer, especially if it's a consultant outside the architectural firm. They will put schedules on the drawings that has the information on the product. So my specification will just basically be part 1, part 2, as far as installation, like what glue do you use, what nails do you use, and then part 3, installation, and the product information is just referred back to the finished schedules on the drawings.
I like doing division 1 first, because I want to get that to the owner and the contractor and the architect right away. That's why I like doing division 1
I agree
first.
that one should probably be done first. I'm finding more and more that the architect wants to do that, because that requires so much back and forth with the owner that they just want me to do division 2 through whatever.
Yeah, that makes
The
sense.
quote unquote technical sections. But yeah, I agree, because division 1 sections affect everything else.
All right, so we do have a couple more questions that came in. So from Rhiannon, we have, how do you address edits by addendum, highlight, strike through, etc.? Thank you. And obviously that'll differ based on software.
Yeah, I use strikeout track changes, I guess.
And just a quick note, because our company uses SpecLink, is what we do is for every issuance, when we export out the Word files as well, so that when we don't use their track changes feature because we've been having issues with it. And so we use a separate program called Beyond Compare. And what that'll do is we take our entire group of the newly exported sections and we compare them using the Beyond Compare program against the sections that we exported before. So that's how we get around that issue. Julie, you guys use SpecLink as well, correct?
We do.
Yeah. Do you use their track changes feature?
I haven't had to use it, so I don't
Mhm.
use it. I know you can use it per project or even just per
Mhm.
section, but I'm not usually
Okay.
using it.
Okay. Right. And then Sherry, can you, just for people who might not be very familiar in Microsoft Word, how to use the track changes feature, can you describe a little bit how that works?
Oh, yeah, when you use track changes, it will underline, if you set it, this is how I have it set up, is underline your additions and then it strikes out your deletions.
Mhm.
So then when you print things out, it'll have an underline or or you can set it to be bold or in a color or whatever your additions. And then on the left-hand side, it'll have a little vertical marker to indicate that there's a change in that paragraph.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is you can just press a button to turn it on and off, and then you
Yeah.
can accept all. So that's
Yeah,
great.
and I've got that in the top bar of
Mhm.
my Word menu,
Mhm.
whatever, so I can just click it off and on as needed.
Perfect. All right. So from Micah from Hatch, asking for recommendations for developing technical sections before Division 1 is available, when Division 1 is supplied by the owner.
I think what you're asking is how do you develop it without Division 1 and one that makes references back to Division 1?
Mhm.
Oftentimes I'll say refer to Division 1 just generically. Or you don't refer back to it at all. Just wait until you hold off, kind of like David's waiting for the finish schedule to arrive. Is highlight it so that you can come back and catch those references back.
Great. And I think I'm not seeing any more questions in here. So I think if anybody would like to ask a question, this is your last chance. Add them in. All
Well,
right.
last chance, you can contact any of us, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sherry. We're gonna let everybody. Oh, here we go. From Melissa from Cobalt Creative. One of the most daunting things to me are selecting the reference standards. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Does anyone think of the spec? I'm sorry. Any of the spec writing software have hot links?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think they do. I think doesn't Melissa, I think BSD or SpecLink does.
Yeah, so one of the nice things about SpecLink is that it has essentially they maintain a library of updated reference standards. So when you're creating your spec, you drag in the reference standard, and then it'll be like ASTM E80, E84 or whatever, and it'll link to their global term. And so every time that reference standard is updated, it'll update in your section with the correct year, if the reference standard name ever changes, that sort of thing. And there is on the sidebar, there's a link to it, or if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's actually a link to the where you would purchase it and not a link to the actual standard. And so that's something that's a little bit of a limitation, but you can change the link if you have it maybe saved to your own standard or to your own server or anything like that. You can also, if you're doing things in Word and you have a link in your server or you have it online, you can set up a link there for yourself so you can click it and go straight there as well. I don't know, Sherry, how do you maintain your standards?
Usually by error. Somebody pointing it out to me like, oh, that's the wrong standard. I found that the standards don't change a whole lot. Once they're in your guide spec, they're pretty set. Every once in a while, we do run into a change for sure. But that's, like I said, it's usually by error. And then it's like, oh my gosh, how many times have I used this? You have to go back and change it in 20 different projects. Which is the nice thing about SpecLink.
Yeah. So Juan Carlos asked where we can find the recording of the webinar. I'll send out an email to everybody letting you know when this is uploaded and also the link to register for Sherry's next webinar. And then Christina was asking if there's a company where she can find resources for technical writers who are certified in CSI master format to help editing specs.
I think
yeah.
most of us, what are your thoughts on that, Melissa?
I would say
think go to
skip.
CSI resources
Yep.
or skip, either
Or
one.
skip.
Yeah. Yeah. So skip is specifiers in independent practice.
Yeah, and they have a new website.
Oh, okay.
So it's no longer skip.com. Cheryl Hansen, are you still on line here? She might have it. Or David, do you know what it is?
I put the wrong one in, but I'll put the right one in.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
there you go.
perfect.
Skip.club express.
That's
Oh.
weird.
Oh, weird.
Out there. So I don't know what it's changed to.
Okay. So it looks like the new address for that is SCIP skip.clubexpress.com. And so through that, you'll be able to find a bunch of consultants or independent consultants who will be able to help writing specs. And so that's a great place to start. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. And is there any other questions? Oh,
I
thank you,
have
Melissa.
one question for you, Melissa. What is the next series or
Oh, yes.
you know what I'm trying to ask? In February, there's another
Yes, thank
session.
you. Yeah,
Can
so
you
on
announce that?
February 20th, we're going to have the next class in this series. So it's going to be for design practitioners. So that's for anybody who is a design practitioner who is working with a specifier. So not necessarily writing your own specifications, but coordinating with somebody who is writing the specs for you. And so they're on your team or they're a consultant and trying to figure out how to make the most of that relationship and how to best use your time and their time, whether it means sending information back and forth, using their recommendations, things like that. And so when we send out this the email follow up with the link to YouTube, we'll also send out the link to register for that meeting for anybody who's interested. So like I mentioned before we got started, it's a 5-part series. It's all free. We'd love to see you at as many as you would like, but they will all be on YouTube later if you miss any.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sherry. We really,
Yeah,
really
thank
appreciate it.
you.
It was
Thank
wonderful.
you. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.